the big games of Week 13 in the NFL. There's a lot of action and some big upsets. Let's get started. The Cleveland Browns traveled to Nashville, Tennessee to take on the frontrunners in the AFC South, the Tennessee Titans. Both the Browns and Titans were 8 and 3 and looking to get closer to clinching a playoff berth. However, early on, Tennessee did not look ready to win or ready at all, and the Browns took advantage of it. Baker Mayfield would throw 4 touchdown passes in the first half to have the Browns with a 38-7 lead going into the break. They eventually would end up sealing the deal 41-35. Mayfield would throw 25 of 33 for 334 yards. Jarvis Landry would also score a touchdown on a 2-yard pass from Baker Mayfield. Derrick Henry had a rare fumble, and Donovan Peoples-Jones would have another touchdown pass from Baker Mayfield. Nick Chubb had 8 yards rushing on 18 carries. Rashard Higgins had 95 yards receiving on 6 receptions and 1 touchdown. For the Titans, Ryan Tannehill threw for 389 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Derrick Henry struggled for his standards, and he would only rush for 60 yards. Corey Davis, the former first-round pick, had 11 catches for 182 yards receiving and 1 touchdown. The Raiders traveled to the Meadowlands to take on the winless Jets from New York. Vegas was trying to forget about their tough loss to the Falcons. On the other hand, the Jets were just trying to get their first win of the 2020 campaign. The Jets started off the game very quickly and took a 7-0 lead. Vegas would then take a 13-7 lead and at one time a 24-13 lead. But here come the Jets. They would get 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion and had a 28-24 lead with just seconds left to play. But in Jets fashion, they would all out blitz, and Derrick Henry would find first-round pick Henry Ruggs in the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. The Las Vegas Raiders hold on to come back to beat the Jets 31-28. But look on the bright side, Jets fans. You still have the number 1 pick and the sweepstakes for Trevor Lawrence. Derek Carr for the Raiders was 28 of 47 for 381 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and 1 interception. Deontay Booker, filling in for Josh Jacobs, had 50 yards rushing on 16 carries. And Darren Waller was a beast with 13 receptions for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sam Darnold was 14 of 23 for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ty Johnson had a great game with 104 yards rushing on 22 carries and 1 score. Jamison Crowder had 5 receptions for 47 yards and 2 scores. The Dolphins were trying to keep their playoff hopes alive, and the Bengals were just trying to play spoiler. Tua got the start and was hoping to get Miami to their 8th win of the season. Brandon Allen early on would throw an interception, but the Dolphins could not take advantage. However, there were a few fights that happened in the game, before and after. In fact, it was so severe that 5 players were ejected that included Dolphins wide receiver Devontae Parker, cornerback Xavier Howard, Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, Bengals safety Sean Williams, and Dolphins Matt Cullen. The main reason was because in the second quarter, Bengals Mike Thomas had an unnecessary hit on Dolphins wide receiver Jakeem Grant. Even Miami's head coach, Brian Flores, got into the mix. The Dolphins would hold on or would come back to beat the Bengals 19-7 despite trailing 7-0 early. Tua Tagovailoa would get a 1 touchdown pass of the game. They would also grab 2 field goals. He would throw 26 of 39 for 296 yards. Myles Gaskin had rushed for 90 yards on 21 carries. Mike Gesicki had 88 yards receiving and 1 touchdown. For the Bengals, Brandon Allen had 153 yards passing on 11 of 19 attempts, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Giovanni Bernard had 30 yards on 12 carries, and Tyler Boyd had 1 catch for 72 yards. The Bengals' only score of the game came from him. The Minnesota Vikings were trying to get their 5th win in the last 6 games and trying to get to 500 for the first time this season. The Jags had lost 10 straight up to this point after upsetting the Colts in Week 1. The game was a lot closer than most fans for the Vikings or any fans in the NFL wanted to see. The Jags opened up the game with a 28-yard touchdown pass from Mike Glennon to give Jacksonville an early 6-0 lead. At one time, they had a 9-0 lead, but here comes Minnesota. They would score, but they'd miss the extra point, and they would continually start scoring and take an early 21-16 or take a 19-16 lead, but thanks to a safety, they'd go up by 5. But here come the Jaguars. They tied the game, and the closing seconds they would get and force overtime. But on the first possession, they would throw an interception that would lead to the go-ahead field goal by Dan Bailey. Final score of the Vikings 27, the Jaguars 24. Kirk Cousins was 28 of 43 for 305 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and 1 interception. Dalvin Cook rushed for 120 yards on 32 carries, and the rookie Justin Jefferson, Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate, had 9 receptions for 121 yards and another touchdown. Mike London was 28 of 42 for 280 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Josh Robinson rushed for 78 yards on 18 carries and 1 touchdown. Colin Johnson led the way for the Jags with 86 yards receiving on 4 receptions. The battle for the AFC South continued as the Indianapolis Colts took on the rival, the Houston Texans. The Colts were just trying to stay in the playoff race, while the Texans were just trying to remain competitive and maybe get a chance to play in the postseason. Philip Rivers got his chance to play, and he threw for 285 yards on 27 of 35 passes and 2 touchdowns. The game would go somewhat back and forth, and at one time, the Colts had a 24-20 lead going into half. They would get a 26-20 lead thanks to a safety. But at the end, Houston was driving and could have scored and upset the Colts, but Deshaun Watson would fumble the handoff. The Colts would recover, and the game was history. Jonathan Taylor for the Colts had 91 yards on 13 carries. T.Y. Hilton 110 yards receiving on 6 receptions and 1 touchdown as well. Deshaun Watson was 26 of 38 for 341 yards and 1 interception. He also fumbled. David Johnson rushed for 44 yards and 1 touchdown. We switch from the AFC South to the NFC South. NFC leading New Orleans Saints led by Taysom Hill at quarterback. The Falcons are 4-7 and have won their last 3 of the 4, and we're coming off a big win versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Taysom Hill threw his first ever touchdown pass in the first quarter as he would find wide receiver Traquan Smith. He would find another touchdown pass to Jared Cook. He had 2 touchdown passes in the game for his first in his career. Alvin Kamara would get a rushing touchdown to go up 21-9, and the Falcons would get a touchdown from Matt Ryan to Russell Gage to trim the lead, but could not win. The final score, the Saints would hold on to win 21-16. Alvin Kamara had 89 yards on 15 carries and 1 touchdown. Michael Thomas had 9 receptions for 105 yards. Matt Ryan was 19 of 39 for 273 yards and 1 touchdown. The reeling Arizona Cardinals hope to get back to their winning ways as they hosted the NFC West rival, the LA Rams. On the opening drive of the game, the Cardinals would strike early. Kyler Murray would find Dan Arnold to make it 7-0. But the Rams would score 17 unanswered points to make it a 17-7 lead going into the third quarter. Kyler Murray would find the end zone as he would find his number 1 target, DeAndre Hopkins. But after that, the Rams would control the game, including getting an interception by Troy Hill that sealed the win for the Rams. The final score of the LA Rams 38, the Arizona Cardinals 28. Jared Goff was 37 of 47 for 351 yards, 1 touchdown. Cam Akers had 72 yards on the ground and 1 touchdown, and Robert Woods at 85 yards receiving. Kyler Murray was 21 of 39 for 173 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Kenyon Drake had 10 carries, 49 yards, and 1 touchdown. Dan Arnold, the tight end, had 2 receptions for 61 yards and 1 touchdown. The New England Patriots traveled to the beautiful SoFi Stadium with no fans to take on the struggling Chargers. The Patriots just needed 1 more win to have a chance at the playoffs. Despite having a quarterback that threw for less than 70 yards, they would dominate the Chargers. They won 45-0. Ironic before the Sunday's game, Anthony Lynn told his player, well, the season is pretty much over for us and we have no chance to make the postseason. I think that got to the Chargers. The New England Patriots had a 29-0 lead at half. Justin Herbert struggles as he threw 2 picks and only had 26 completion on 53 pass attempts. Devin Harris had 80 yards on the ground for the New England, and Austin Eckler for the Chargers had 36 yards on 8 rushing attempts. Keenan Allen had 5 receptions for 48 yards. Don't look now, but the Patriots are now 500 and have a chance to make the postseason. And it seems evident that head coach Anthony Lynn will be fired when the season is over or right before it. Another game and another dub for the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles traveled to Green Bay and tried to make it a game versus the NFC North leading Patriots. They tried their best, but at the end of the day, Green Bay just flexed their muscles and won by 14. But the game wasn't the big story. Jalen Hurts came in for Carson Wentz finally as Carson Wentz was benched. Jalen Hurts threw for more yards than Carson Wentz and threw for 109 yards and 1 touchdown pass. However, he did throw an INT. Jalen Reagor, the rookie draft pick, would get a 72-yard kickoff return, which at the time trimmed the lead to 6 points. But Aaron Jones' 77-yard rushing touchdown would seal the deal for the Pack. Aaron Rodgers, well, he didn't have one, but he did have a solid game. He finished the game with 3 touchdown passes, 295 yards, and was 25 of 34. Devontae Adams had 121 yards, and guess what? He had 2 more touchdowns to add to his collection. Jalen Hurts had 109 yards passing, as we mentioned, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Miles Sanders had 31 yards on 10 carries, and Dallas Goedert had 66 yards on 5 receptions. The NFC West leading Seattle Seahawks hosted the New York Giants on Sunday. And by the way, at this time, the New York Giants were somehow leading the division at 4-7. Well, the Giants decided to play Colt McCoy, their backup quarterback, to replace an injured Daniel Jones. Well, it seemed to work because they somehow upset the Seattle Seahawks 17-12 and had a 14-5 lead at one point. Wayne Gallman was solid. He had 135 yards and 16 carries, and Evan Ingram finally showed up with 4 receptions for 32 yards. Colt McCoy was 13 of 22 for 105 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Russell Wilson might have taken himself out of the MVP race after he threw only 263 yards on 27 of 43, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Chris Carson rushed for 65 yards and 13 carries, and a rising superstar DK Metcalf at 80 yards on 5 receptions. The Kansas City Chiefs had a scare on Sunday night. The undisputed defending Super Bowl champions hosted the rival Denver Broncos and looked very wounded on Sunday Night Football. The Broncos were able to ground and pound and use clock, not turn the ball over, and get 1 or 2 punts from the Chiefs. They had a 10-9 lead and were shutting the Chiefs down when they got inside the 20-yard line. The Chiefs would get a few field goals, and eventually it would seal the deal for them. They would hold on to a 22-16 win after officially ending the game with an interception from Drew Lock. The Chiefs were able to also get 2 turnovers from Drew Lock. He did, however, throw for 318, or not 318. So that was Patrick Mahomes. He did, however, throw for a modest 151 yards and 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Melvin Gordon rushed for 131 yards on 15 carries, and Noah Fant had 57 yards receiving on 4 catches. Patrick Mahomes was 25 of 40 for 318 and 1 touchdown. Well, I think he right now is the safe bet for MVP. Le'Veon Bell rushed 40 yards, 11 carries, and Travis Kelce had 136 yards receiving on 8 receptions and added 1 score. The undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers hosted the Washington football team on Monday Night Football. It's been a strange year, as now we're starting to see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and guess what? We'll even see a Friday game on Thanksgiving. It's been a crazy game. Crazy year. I think I'm somehow getting used to it. Washington was a massive underdog, but somehow the football team, without even a name, would go out and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers would suffer their first loss. After the game was over, the Dolphins were popping champagne and remained the only undefeated team in National Football League history. The Steelers jumped out to a 14-0 lead at early, but here comes Washington. They end up sealing the deal 23-17 thanks to getting a late interception by Big Ben. Alex Smith was 31 of 46 for 296 yards and 1 touchdown. Just give that man the comeback player of the year. Logan Thomas, who was slowly becoming Alex Smith's favorite target, had 9 receptions for 98 yards and 1 touchdown. By the way, Logan Thomas was a former quarterback at Virginia Tech. And Peyton Barber rushed for 23 yards on 14 carries. Roethlisberger would throw for 305 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 reception. He threw over 50 times, and the Steelers did drop the ball 7 times. Anthony McFarland, filling in for all the injured running backs for the Steelers, had 15 yards on 4 carries. James Washington had 2 receptions for 80 yards and 1 touchdown. The 8-3 Bills took on their injury-prone 5-6 Niners, who were now playing in Glendale, Arizona instead of Santa Clara because of the ban. Unfortunately, in Santa Clara, the 49ers are not allowed to play because of no contact sports for the next 3 weeks. Well, the 49ers showed promise as they would get 2 big stops by the Bills and would open the game with a touchdown to make it 7-0. But at the end of the day, the Bills were just the better football team. They flexed their muscles and won 34-24. It's just not the Niners' year. Yeah, they still have a chance to make the playoffs, but there's been so many injuries that include George Kittle, Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Bosa, and even guys like Richard Sherman and Fred Warner battled injury. And on top of that, they traded their best linebacker. So again, it's not been a great season. Josh Allen threw 4 touchdown passes. He was also 32 of 40 for 375 yards. Devin Singletary had 18 carries for 61 yards, and Cole Beasley led the way in receiving for the Bills with 130 yards on 9 catches and added 1 score. For the Niners, Nick Mullins is a good quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback. And the reason why, He was 26 of 39 for 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he did throw 2 INTs. Jeff Wilson was back and had 47 yards and 7 carries, and Brandon Ayuk had 5 receptions for 95 yards and 1 touchdown. Last but not least, the Cowboys versus the Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens are looking to end their 3-game losing streak versus the Cowboys on Tuesday Night Football. The Dallas Cowboys were hoping to stay in the thick of things in the atrocious NFC East. Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, would return for the Ravens after testing positive for COVID-19 on Thanksgiving night. Well, it started a little slow as Lamar Jackson threw an interception to start the game that the Cowboys would drive for a field goal. But the next possession, he would get a 37-yard touchdown pass on a 4th and 2, and then he would find Miles Boykin in the end zone for the first time this season, or for the first time in 3 weeks, and they had a 14-10 lead, and they never looked back. They would eventually win the game 34-17 thanks to Lamar Jackson throwing two touchdown passes, one to Marquise Brown, the other one to Miles Boykin, and having a rushing touchdown. He also threw 170 yards and and as we all know, he had 1 rushing touchdown. Gus Edwards led the way for Baltimore with 7 carries for 101 yards, and Marquise Brown had 5 receptions, 39 yards, and 1 touchdown. Andy Dalton had a nice game and threw for 285 yards, 2 touchdowns,